I never liked walking home late, but working the closing shift at the diner meant it was either that or pay for an expensive cab I couldn't afford. Most nights, the streets were empty, lit only by the occasional flickering street lamp. There was something oddly peaceful about it, a kind of quiet that felt like the world had momentarily paused, but not that night. It was a little past 2:30 a.m. when I left. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin, and a low fog had started to creep in from the river. The streets were slick from a light rain, reflecting the orange glow of the lamps. I had just passed an old, boarded-up theater when I saw him. At first, I thought it was just a drunk or a street performer finishing a night's routine. He stood under a flickering light, dressed in an old-fashioned, ill-fitting suit, something from the 40s maybe. His movements were jerky and theatrical, like he was trying to mimic a silent film character. He danced in slow, exaggerated steps, arms flailing loosely, had cocked at an unnatural angle. But what really sent a chill through me was his smile. It stretched impossibly wide, far beyond what a normal mouth should allow, teeth impossibly white against the sickly pallor of his face. His eyes, empty, unblinking, locked onto mine from across the street. I quickened my pace. There was no reason to be scared, I told myself. It's just a weirdo. Every city's got them. But as I moved, he started following, still dancing. His footsteps made no sound, yet he moved in perfect time with me. Every corner I turned, he was there, as though the space between us never changed, no matter how quickly I walked. When I broke into a jog, so did he, keeping perfect pace, the same eerie, lurching dance never faltering. I crossed the street, ducking behind parked cars and trash bins, hoping to lose him. For a moment, I thought it worked. The street was empty again, my heart pounded in my ears. And then, a soft humming. I turned. There he was, standing in the middle of the road, directly beneath a dead street lamp, his body barely visible against the encroaching fog. The smile hadn't wavered, his head tilted slowly to one side, as if studying me. I took off running. My apartment was 4 blocks away. I sprinted, not daring to look back, hearing nothing but my own ragged breathing and the slap of my sneakers against wet pavement. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every alley mouth felt alive with watching eyes. When I reached my building, I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped them. I managed to unlock the door and slammed it behind me, bolting the dead lock. The hallway was mercifully empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Just as I reached my floor, I couldn't resist one last glance through the building's front glass. He was there, standing perfectly still at the end of the street, his smile visible even from that distance. And then he raised a hand and waved, not a friendly wave. A slow, deliberate one, like a promise. I didn't sleep that night. In the weeks that followed, I stopped walking home, took cabs, ride shares, anything, and yet I'd catch glimpses of him, in reflections, in the corner of my vision, in the gaps between the subway cars, always smiling. It was one of those nights where everything felt wrong. You know the type, where the silence outside is so complete it almost presses against your eardrums, and every little house creak feels like a deliberate sound. I was alone in my apartment, halfway through a horror movie marathon, trying to stave off sleep. A storm had rolled in earlier, and now the rain tapped incessantly against the windows like tiny, impatient fingers. That's when the knock came. 3 slow, deliberate taps at the front door. I froze. It was nearly midnight, and I live in a small town where no one visits unannounced, especially not in the middle of a storm. I muted the TV and strained to listen. Nothing, just the steady rain. Another knock, a little louder this time. I stood, my skin prickling, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Peering through the peephole, I saw 2 figures standing on the porch, a boy and a girl. They couldn't have been older than 10, maybe 11. Something about them was off from the start. They were dressed oddly, The boy in a faded brown jacket several sizes too big, the girl in a pale dress that looked decades out of style, soaked through from the rain. Their skin was unnaturally pale, almost grayish under the porch light, which flickered with every gust of wind. I didn't open the door. I should have just turned off the lights and pretended not to be home. But curiosity, or maybe some deeper instinct, kept me rooted there. Then they spoke. "Can we come in?" the girl asked. Her voice was flat, empty, devoid of emotion, like someone repeating lines they didn't understand. "We need to use your phone," the boy added, his voice a perfect monotone. I swallowed hard. Something was seriously wrong. Every instinct screamed at me not to open that door. I can call someone for you," I stammered. "No," the girl said sharply, "we need to come inside." That's when I saw their eyes. Completely black. No whites, no pupils. Just deep, endless voids where their eyes should have been. A cold wave of terror crashed over me. I stumbled back from the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. They didn't move, didn't blink. Another knock. This one harder. "Let us in," the boy demanded, his voice no longer childlike, but low, unnatural, as though multiple voices spoke through him. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers, glancing back toward the peephole. They were still there, but closer now, pressed against the glass, staring and smiling. The operator answered, but all I could manage was a frantic whisper, "There are kids at my door. Something's wrong with them." The line went dead. No static, no click, just silence. I turned back, and they were gone. The porch was empty, save for the relentless rain. I locked every door, every window, drew the blinds, and sat in a corner clutching a kitchen knife until dawn. But it wasn't over. When the morning light finally broke, I forced myself to check outside. The rain had stopped. The air was heavy and still, and then I saw them. Tiny, wet handprints covering my windows from the inside. I moved out of that place a month later. Never told anyone the full story, who'd believe it. But every so often, usually after midnight, I swear I hear those same knocks. 3. Slow, deliberate taps, and I don't check the door anymore. My grandparents' house sat on the edge of a dense forest, the kind of woods that felt ancient, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and old secrets. As kids, my cousins and I would spend summers there, running wild through the trees, building forts, and pretending we were explorers. But there was one place we never went. About a mile into the woods was a small, overgrown clearing, where an old stone well stood at its center. No one knew who built it or how long it had been there. My grandfather called it the Bad Well and warned us to stay far away. He told us the same story every year. If you look into that well at midnight, your reflection will smile at you, even if you aren't smiling. We laughed it off, of course. It sounded like something ripped straight out of an old ghost story. But there was something about the way my grandfather told it, the way his voice would lower, his gaze shift toward the window, like he was remembering something he wished he could forget. As the years went on, the legend turned into a dare among us cousins. Every summer someone would claim they'd sneak out and see it for themselves, but no one ever did. Until one year, the last summer we ever spent there together. We were 16, drunk on teenage arrogance and the thrill of being fearless. It was my cousin Kyle who suggested it. "Let's settle this. One of us goes to the well at midnight. Sees what happens." Of course, they picked me. I laughed it off, but my heart was pounding. Deep down, something about that old well had always unsettled me. It wasn't just the stories. It was the way the forest around it seemed different, too quiet, as if even the insects and birds avoided it. At 11:50 p.m., armed with a flashlight and a bottle of cheap whiskey for courage, I made my way into the woods alone. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches forming crooked, skeletal hands overhead. By the time I reached the clearing, the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. The well stood at the center, covered in moss and vines, its stones crumbling with age. My flashlight's beam danced across its surface, revealing long, deep scratches in the rock, like something had clawed at it from the inside. I checked my watch, 11:58, 2 minutes to midnight. I crept closer, every instinct in my body screaming at me to turn back. But I was too proud, too stupid, to stop. When the watch struck 12 o'clock, I forced myself to lean over the well and shine my flashlight inside. At first, there was only darkness. Then, the reflection appeared. It was me, staring back from the water's surface, but it was wrong. Its eyes gleamed with a malicious glee I didn't feel. Its grin stretched unnaturally wide, splitting my face ear to ear. I wasn't smiling, but the thing in the water was, and then it started to move. Its hand reached up, its fingers breaking the surface of the water without a ripple. It grabbed the inside of the well and began pulling itself upward. I stumbled back in horror, the flashlight clattering to the ground. The reflection's head and shoulders were above the water now, its features warped, its smile impossibly wide, teeth jagged and glinting. I ran, blindly crashing through the undergrowth, branches slashing at my face and arms. I didn't care. I didn't stop until I burst out of the woods and onto my grandparents' porch, gasping for breath, my clothes torn and soaked with sweat. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. They would have called me crazy. The next morning, my grandfather gathered us all around. "That well's been sealed," he said gravely, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. "Whatever's down there, it doesn't stay there long once it's seen you." True to his word, men came with concrete and steel plates that afternoon. They filled it in, buried it under a thick slab, and left a crude wooden sign, "Do not disturb." I never went back to those woods, neither did my cousins. But sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the bathroom mirror, a face that isn't quite mine, and it's always smiling. There's an old stretch of road about 20 miles outside my hometown, a narrow two-lane highway that cuts through dense woods on both sides. The locals call it Red Hollow Road, though no one remembers why. It's one of those places parents warn their kids about, claiming it's cursed. People vanish out there, cars break down and are never found again. I always thought it was just a story. Small towns breed those kinds of tales like weeds. That was before the night I met the hitchhiker. It was early fall, cool, dry air and a cloudless night. I was driving home after visiting an old friend out in the country. No other cars in sight, no phone signal. Just my headlights cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw him, a figure standing on the shoulder, half in shadow, one hand raised in a lazy, hitchhiking gesture. He looked like an ordinary man at first glance, tall, thin, dressed in a faded jacket and jeans. But something about the way he stood made my skin prickle, stiff, like a mannequin. I don't know what possessed me, but I slowed down. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity. I pulled over, rolled down the window, just enough to hear him. "You headed west?" he asked. His voice was flat, mechanical, like he was reciting a line he'd said 1,000 times before. I hesitated. There was something wrong with his face. It wasn't the features themselves, high cheekbones, sharp nose, dark eyes. It was the expression, a frozen, empty grin stretched across his face. His lips barely moved when he spoke, and his eyes. They didn't blink, ever. "Yeah," I muttered. "Get in." He climbed into the passenger seat without a word, moving stiffly. The air in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment he closed the door. I kept my eyes on the road, pretending not to notice how his hands rested awkwardly in his lap, fingers curled like dead spiders. We drove in silence for a long time. Then, out of nowhere, he spoke again. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I forced a laugh, trying to play it cool. "Not really." He turned to look at me. I could feel it, the weight of his stare. "You should." That's when I made the mistake of glancing at him. His face had changed, subtly, but unmistakably. The grin was wider, the teeth longer, too white. His eyes were pitch black, no whites at all. A deep, endless void. I slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, the tires skidding against the asphalt. I looked back to the passenger seat. Empty. The door was still closed. I could see the indent where he'd been sitting. The seatbelt still buckled. I should have left it at that. Should have driven off and never looked back. But some twisted part of me needed proof. I reached over, pulled open the glove compartment, and grabbed my flashlight. The trees around me were utterly still, not a sound anywhere. I shined the light out the window, sweeping the woods, and that's when I saw it, a face. Half hidden behind a tree, grinning. It wasn't the man's face anymore, it was mine, staring at me, the exact same smirk, the same hollow, soulless eyes. Then it spoke, though the mouth didn't move. I told you to believe. I slammed the gas pedal and tore down the road, not stopping until I reached the next town. I tried to tell the police, but they looked at me like I was crazy. No one believed me, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't the first time. Since that night, I've started seeing that face in other places, in mirrors, reflections on dark windows, in the corner of my phone's camera roll, in photos I don't remember taking, always grinning, always waiting. There's a house at the end of a road in my hometown that no one talks about. It's a crumbling, two-story Victorian with boarded-up windows and a sagging porch, swallowed by overgrown weeds. The kind of place you'd expect to see in an old horror movie. But there's one window, second floor, left side, that's never boarded up. They call it the collector's window. Growing up, every kid in town had heard the same story. If you passed that house after midnight and looked up at that window, you'd see a face staring down at you, not a ghost, not a reflection. A real, living face, and if you made eye contact, you wouldn't be able to look away. Then, the next morning, one more name would be added to the town's missing persons list. It sounded ridiculous. One of those urban legends meant to scare dumb teenagers. But the weird part, every couple of years, someone did go missing in that area, always near the woods, close to that house. I hadn't thought about it in years, not until last fall. I was visiting my hometown for my dad's funeral, staying in my old room, the one that overlooked the stretch of road leading to that house. The first night back, around 12:30 a.m., I caught myself staring at the place through the window. And there it was, a pale face in the upstairs window, barely visible in the moonlight. It wasn't moving, just watching. I told myself it was a trick of the light, grief messing with my head. But it stayed there, night after night, same face, same expressionless stare. Finally, on the fourth night, I decided to end it. I grabbed a flashlight, threw on my jacket, and headed down the road. The air felt unnaturally still, like the world itself was holding its breath. No crickets, no wind, just the crunch of dead leaves under my boots. When I reached the house, the front gate hung off its hinges. The front door was cracked open, darkness yawning beyond. I should have turned back. Instead, I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under my weight. The air smelled of rot and something metallic, faint, like old coins. I made my way upstairs, each step creaking in protest. The house seemed to lean inward, as though it resented my presence. When I reached the second-floor landing, I saw the window, but no face. The room behind it was empty, just a cracked floor, yellowed wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. I stepped inside, shining the flashlight around. That's when I saw them. Dozens of small, glass jars lined the shelves. Inside each one, a human eye, some fresh, some clouded with decay. I nearly screamed, but something else caught my attention. A notebook, sitting open on a crooked table. I stepped closer, my stomach turning. The pages were filled with names and dates, each one crossed out. Names I recognized, people from town who'd gone missing over the years. And then, at the bottom of the last page, my name. The date, that very night, I dropped the flashlight. The room plunged into darkness, and then, behind me, a soft whisper, "I've been waiting for you." Before I could turn, something cold and clammy gripped my shoulder. I tried to scream, but a hand clamped over my mouth. The last thing I saw before passing out was my reflection in the window. But it wasn't my face anymore, it was the collector's, and it was smiling. I woke up the next morning on my bedroom floor, my clothes filthy and torn. The sun was rising. When I looked out the window, the old house was gone. Nothing but an empty, overgrown lot. But sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of movement in my mirror. A face behind my own, watching, and I know it's waiting. Because there's still one name left on that list. When I was 18, my parents bought an old fixer-upper on the outskirts of a small town called Whitmore. The house was one of those classic, century-old farmhouses, wraparound porch, sloping roof, more rooms than anyone needed. It had sat empty for over a decade before we moved in. Locals whispered about it, of course. Said the previous owners had left in the dead of night. Said no one lasted long in that place. But my parents laughed it off. They got it cheap. The first time I felt it was on move-in day. I was carrying boxes upstairs when I passed the narrow hallway near the back of the house, leading to a tiny door set low into the wall. A crawl space. I hadn't noticed it on the tour. Something about it made the hairs on my neck stand up. It wasn't the way it looked. It was how it felt. Like something was watching me from the other side. I told myself it was nothing, but that night, I heard the breathing. Soft, ragged, just under my bed. I shot up, heart pounding. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and slowly crouched down. Nothing, just the dusty underside of my bed frame. I checked the closet, empty, but when I stepped into the hallway, the crawlspace door was wide open. I swear I'd closed it. The darkness inside felt alive, heavy. The beam of my phone's light barely cut through it. But I swear, for a split second, I saw a face, pale, gaunt, staring back at me with sunken eyes, and then it was gone. I slammed the door shut and shoved a chair in front of it. I didn't tell my parents, but it kept happening. Every night around 3:07 a.m., I'd wake up to the sound of floorboards creaking. Faint, steady footsteps, a shuffle, like someone dragging a foot. And always, the crawlspace door would be opened by morning. One night, I left my phone recording, facing the hallway. In the morning, the video was 2 hours of silence. Until 3:07 a.m., that's when I heard it. A faint, wet breathing, a dragging sound, and then a voice. Barely a whisper, "I'm still here," and just for a second, a figure appeared in the frame. Thin, hair hanging in greasy strands, hollow eyes locked onto the camera. I ran out of the house and didn't go back for 3 days. When I finally did, I begged my dad to help me seal up the crawl space. We nailed it shut, placed a dresser in front of it, anything to keep it closed. But 2 weeks later, my little sister vanished. Vanished from her room without a trace, her window locked from the inside, and the crawlspace door, somehow, standing wide open again. We never found her. The police claimed she must have run away, but we knew better. I can still hear the breathing some nights. Even now, years later, in a different town, a different house. Always at 3:07 a.m., and sometimes, when I wake, I find my bedroom door open, and a trail of faint, wet footprints leading to my bed. Because the man in the crawlspace isn't tied to a house, he's tied to me. Back in college, I worked the night shift at a small, independent radio station in my hometown. Wizix 103.6 FM. It was one of those old school setups where you had to manually load tracks, adjust dials, and occasionally speak live between songs. Most of the town was asleep by the time my shift started at midnight, and most nights, the station was dead quiet. I actually liked it. Just me, the music, and the low hum of equipment. But there was one night I'll never forget. It started like any other. I brewed a stale cup of coffee, grabbed a few old CDs, and sat down at the console. At around 1:14 a.m., the phone rang. Which was weird. The studio line rarely rang, especially that late. I hesitated, then picked up. WZXE, you're on the air. At first, nothing but static, then a voice, faint and broken, as if it were traveling through a storm of interference. Don't stop the broadcast. The line went dead. Chills ran down my spine. I tried to shake it off, assuming it was a prank, but something felt off. The equipment around me flickered, the air went heavy, and for a moment it felt like the whole room tilted. Then the emergency broadcast system light came on. I hadn't touched anything. A shrill, warbling tone blared through the speakers, and an automated voice began speaking. This is a message for the one listening. You must not stop the transmission. I stared at the console in disbelief. The station wasn't connected to any active emergency alert service. We were too small. And even if we were, why would it address me directly? Then the music system crashed. All screens went black, except one. An old CRT monitor in the corner, usually used for weather updates. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy, night vision feed of the station's parking lot, and there was someone standing there. A tall figure in dark clothes, head tilted, staring straight up at the studio window. My stomach dropped. There was no way anyone could get into the building without triggering the security alarm. But there he was. Then, the studio lights flickered. The emergency broadcast tone surged again, louder this time, and the same voice came through. You have to keep broadcasting. If the air goes dead, he'll come in. I scrambled to get the music system running again, slamming buttons, ejecting C-discs, plugging in a mic to speak. Anything. Outside, the figure began walking slowly toward the building. The camera feed followed him, though I hadn't touched it. I managed to get a track playing, some random old country song, and the second it started, the light stabilized. The air felt lighter. The emergency light flicked off. The figure stopped moving. I didn't leave that station until dawn. When the day crew came in, I told them everything. Of course, no one believed me, said I must have fallen asleep. But when I checked the security footage, there was nothing. No man, no parking lot feed, not even the emergency alert system logs. But someone had left a note on my desk. A torn scrap of yellowed paper, written in a jagged, frantic scrawl, "Dead air is death." I quit that night. But sometimes, when I'm in my car late at night, tuning through static-filled stations, lines catch a brief warbling tone and a voice in the static. Don't stop the broadcast, and I'll feel him watching, waiting, because somewhere out there, something still listens. I used to work the overnight shift as a nurse at a small regional hospital. The kind of place that had maybe 24 occupied beds on a busy night, and where the corridors always felt too quiet after midnight. We had our fair share of strange cases over the years, unexplained deaths, patients swearing they'd seen shadow figures at the edge of their rooms. Most of us learned to shrug it off, but there was one night I still can't forget. It started like any other. I was doing my rounds at around 2 a.m., checking vitals in room 207. An older man, Mr. Hargrove, who'd been admitted with pneumonia. He was stable, but I remember the way he looked at me as I entered, like he wanted to warn me, but couldn't speak. His heart rate was up. I adjusted his 4 and reassured him, but he just stared past me, toward the doorway, his lips moving without sound. When I turned to look, no one was there, or so I thought. As I stepped back into the hallway, I saw a figure down the corridor. A woman, barefoot, wearing a hospital gown. Her long, black hair hung in damp strands over her face, and her skin was deathly pale, like porcelain in moonlight. Visitors weren't allowed after 10 p.m. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. She just slowly turned her head toward me, and that's when I saw her eyes. They were completely black. No whites, no iris. Just twin voids. My body went cold. I'd seen patients in all states of injury, disfigurement, death, but nothing had ever made me feel like that, like something ancient and predatory was looking at me. She smiled. A slow, unnatural stretch of the lips that showed teeth to sharp, to many. And then she stepped into room 208. I snapped out of it and rushed after her. The room was empty. The bed was made. No one inside. But the air was ice cold. The heart monitor on the wall, which hadn't been in use, suddenly spiked with activity. A steady, frantic beep, though no patient was hooked to it. I reached for the call button to page security, and saw something on the wall, scratched into the pale green paint, with what looked like dried blood. I see you. I left that room and bolted to the nurse's station, told my supervisor everything. She gave me that patronizing, tired smile they always give when someone talks about weird night shift stories. But then she pulled up the room logs. Room 208 hadn't been occupied for 6 years. A young woman named Lila Jensen had died there, overdose, according to the report. The staff used to joke about her spirit wandering the halls, but it had always been just that, a joke, until that night, when we checked the security feed. The hallway cameras between 150 and the 10 a.m. were dead, static. When they came back online, there was a single frame captured at 07 a.m. A woman in a hospital gown, staring directly into the camera, eyes pitch black. Her mouth open in a scream, but there was no sound. The image corrupted the moment after. I quit the hospital 2 weeks later. To this day, sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night, I'll feel a presence near my bed. A cold, damp air, a shadow at the corner of my room. And when I check my reflection, my eyes look just a little too dark, as if something's waiting inside, waiting for the right moment to look out. When I was 17, my best friend Marcus convinced me to play something called the Midnight Game. If you've never heard of it, it's one of those old urban legends that supposedly originated in some ancient punishment ritual. The idea is simple. You invite something into your house at midnight, then try to avoid it until 3:33 a.m. If it finds you before then, bad things happen. I never believed in any of that supernatural crap, but Marcus was obsessed with that stuff. Creepypastas, old folk tales, weird internet rituals. And back then, I'd do just about anything to prove I wasn't scared. So one stormy Friday night, we decided to do it. We gathered what the instructions said we'd need. A candle, a sheet of paper, a drop of our own blood, and a wooden door. At exactly 12 a.m., we wrote our names on the paper, pricked our fingers with a needle, let a drop of blood fall on it, and placed it in front of my bedroom door. Then we lit the candle and knocked on the wood 22 times, the final knock landing exactly at midnight. I half expected the candle to blow out on its own, or some dramatic bang at the window. Nothing, just silence. We both laughed, called it stupid, and sat down to play video games. Until about 12:40 a.m., when the air in the room dropped, like someone had opened a freezer. The candle flickered violently, and then, without warning, went out. I tried relighting it, but my lighter wouldn't work. Then we heard it. A slow, deliberate knock on the bedroom door. Marcus went pale. Neither of us had moved, and we were alone in the house. Another knock. I whispered for Marcus to stop screwing around, but he looked just as terrified as I felt. Then something scratched down the length of the door, slow and rough, like long nails dragging against wood. We scrambled to relight the candle. When we finally managed it, the sound stopped. I wanted to end the game right then, but Marcus insisted the rules said you couldn't. If you tried, he would claim you on the spot. So, we moved from room to room, carrying the candle, trying to stay ahead of whatever it was. Every time the flame flickered or dimmed, we'd hear it again. A shuffle of footsteps, a ragged, wet breath behind us. A sharp knock from the walls. At one point, I swear I saw a shape in the hallway mirror. Tall, thin, its face stretched into a sick, grinning expression, but where its eyes should have been, only deep, black pits. We made it to the kitchen at about 3:15 a.m., only 18 minutes to go. That's when the candle died. Complete, suffocating darkness. We froze, listening. And then came the sound of something crawling. Not walking, crawling. Scraping fingernails across tile. I felt something cold brush against my ankle. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Marcus whispered, his voice trembling, "He's here." I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the end. And then, silence. No breathing. No crawling. A distant church bell chimed 3:33 a.m. When I opened my eyes, the candle was lit again. We never spoke about it after that night. A week later, Marcus moved to another town, stopped answering my messages. A few months back, I got curious and looked him up. Found an article about a young man who'd vanished from his apartment. Neighbors claimed to hear strange knocking sounds coming from inside before the police arrived. The last photo taken of him before he disappeared showed Marcus sitting at his kitchen table, a single, lit candle in front of him, and standing behind him, a tall, thin figure in the shadows, its eyes empty. A few years ago, when I was working as a freelance house cleaner to pay off college debt, I got hired to clean an old property on the edge of town. It was one of those crumbling Victorian-style mansions, the kind that looks abandoned even when the lights are on. The woman who hired me never gave her name. She just emailed me vague instructions. Clean the first floor. Do not go upstairs. Be done before sundown. I should have said no right then. But the pay was too good, and I was desperate. When I arrived, the place was already unlocked. No one greeted me. No car in the driveway. Just the smell of damp wood and something metallic in the air. The kind of smell you can't quite place, but it makes the back of your throat tighten. I started in the living room. Every surface was covered in dust, but what stood out were the objects. The house was filled with things, dolls with glassy, staring eyes, old photographs in tarnished frames, jars filled with cloudy liquids and unidentifiable objects floating inside. It didn't feel like a home, it felt like a collection. I kept telling myself to finish fast, stay on the first floor, and get out. But around noon, I noticed something strange. The photographs on the walls weren't old family portraits like I thought at first. They were photos of people sleeping. Men, women, children, lying in bed, eyes closed. Some of them had their mouths open mid-breath. Some looked like they'd been crying. And in every single photo, there was a shadow in the corner of the room. A figure you could barely make out, but it was always there, watching. I felt sick, but I kept cleaning. When I moved to the study, I found a desk filled with old letters. Most were unreadable, faded with age. But one stood out. The ink was still fresh. For the new guest, it said at the top. It wasn't long, just a few lines. He collects, he watches. If you hear footsteps upstairs, leave. Do not let him find you in his house after dark. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some sick joke. Then I heard it. A single, deliberate footstep on the floor above me, followed by another, and another. Slow, heavy. I froze. The sun was still up, but the house felt darker. The air heavier. I grabbed my bag and headed for the front door. It wouldn't open. No matter how hard I turned the knob, it wouldn't budge. Windows nailed shut. No cell signal. I was trapped. The footsteps moved to the top of the staircase. I didn't look. I didn't want to see. I ran to the kitchen, searching for something, anything, and found an old, rusted key hanging on a nail. I didn't know what it unlocked, but I didn't have a choice. The footsteps started down the stairs. I tried every door I could find. Hall closets, pantry, until one opened to a basement. I bolted down, slamming the door behind me just as the footsteps reached the ground floor. I crouched in the dark, barely breathing. That's when I noticed what was down there. Shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes labeled by name. Each box held a single item, a watch, a lock of hair, a photograph. And in the center of the room was a display case. Inside it was a Polaroid of me, sleeping, in my bed, taken the night before. I stumbled back, heart pounding, as the basement door creaked open. The last thing I saw was a figure descending the steps, tall, shadowed, its face hidden beneath a hood. And then I ran, through some side entrance I hadn't seen before. Didn't stop until I reached the road. I never went back, never told the police. But sometimes, late at night, I wake to the sound of my floor creaking, and I find another Polaroid on my nightstand, me, sleeping, a new one every time. Because you don't leave the collector's house, he leaves with you. Don't forget to hit subscribe and join us for more tales that will keep you up at night. Until next time, sleep with one eye open.